I had to share that story because that's such divine abundance. But as I was preparing this morning's lesson, I was remembering that several years ago in the 1970s, I had a 25-foot motorhome. And so every summer we would travel extensively. We'd go camping all the time. We'd take 2- and 3-week vacations and go off into the woods or go back to Maine or up to Canada. And one year we chose to go to Colorado. And as we were going over a certain pass, I can't remember which one it was, but there was this huge sign out that said Continental Divide. And then there was this line down the middle and I think a couple of arrows that pointed in 2 directions. And so of course we stopped and we took pictures of ourselves in front of the sign, because what happens at the Continental Divide is, depending upon which way the water trickles, it either ends up in the rivers that ultimately end up in the Atlantic Ocean, or it ultimately runs down to the west and ends up in rivers that ultimately end up into the Pacific Ocean. And so we had a lot of fun. I think there was still snow on the ground, and so we were having a snowball fight, and oh, I'm going to throw to the west, and I'm going to throw to the east. We were running back around. But when you stop and think about it, the Continental Divide is actually like walking a ridge in our own life every day. Because on one side is struggle and challenges and uncertainty, and on the other side is one of self-empowerment, one of self-creation and perfection within our own life. We choose which side of the ridge that we will walk on. Now this month's theme, which is abundance, I went back to one of my stories from the Bible, or one of the stories from the Bible that I think is just about abundance and multiplication of abundance. And it comes from Matthew 14:13-20, and it's the story of the fishes and the loaves, how Jesus multiplied the fishes and the loaves to feed 5,000 people. And what's interesting is this is the only story in the Bible that is repeated in each one of the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. No other place in the Bible is there the same, it is another story repeated. So I'd like to start by reading this for you. When Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by boat alone to the desert place. And now, what did he mean by the desert place? What he was doing is he was going to empty himself out. He went to the desert to deplete himself, to allow himself to be empty. And when people heard of it, they followed him by land from the cities. And Jesus went out and saw the large crowd, and he had pity for them, and he healed their sick. When it was evening, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a lonely place, and it is getting late. Dismiss the people so that the men may go to the villages and buy food for themselves." But he said to them, "It is not necessary for them to go. Give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have nothing here except 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes." Jesus said to them, "Bring them here to me." And he ordered the people to sit down on the ground. And why did he do that? Because he wanted them to get grounded. He ordered them to sit down, and he took the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fishes, and he looked up to the heavens, and he blessed them. And he broke them, and he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples placed them before the people. So they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up the fragments which were left over, 12 full baskets. 12 full baskets. Now, most people think of this as a miracle. But when we look to our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, he says this about miracles. It was not the words that Jesus used that performed the miracle. It was his inner conviction of the power that operated on and in and through his words. He called his faith and belief, and in so doing reduced it to the mental attitude or to a way of thinking that we all can understand. There is something that operates on our belief and acts exactly like a law because it is a law and tends to bring about the conditions which correspond to our faith, our beliefs, our way of thinking. So today we're going to focus on those beliefs, that faith, and that way of thinking. Now, Carolyn, when I was talking to Carolyn yesterday, she was sharing with me that, who was it, Carolyn?
Helen Street.
Helen Street, and she's deceased now, isn't she?
Yes.
Okay. She didn't call them miracles, she used to call them ordinaries. I kind of like that. Ordinaries. Because we have ordinaries every day in our life. So today I want to talk about those conditions that you can create, that Jesus used in this story within Matthew. And the first one, or the first condition that we have to create, is about emptiness. That's why I used that first in the meditation. Now, a very, very long time ago, there was a farmer. And he lived in a place on his land where there was a creek that ran through, or a river that ran through, and that river provided nourishment, it provided food or water for his crops, for his family, for his wildlife, or for his stock that he had. And all of a sudden, one year, there was this minor drought. Now, we in Chico wouldn't know anything about that, would we? But none of the other farmers were worried, but this one farmer was scared spitless. He was really afraid because if the water went away, he wouldn't have crops, he wouldn't be able to feed his stock, he wouldn't be able to feed his family, he was going to end up losing everything. And what happened was he was really deeply afraid on the inside. Now the rest of the farmers kept saying, don't worry about it, we've dealt with it before, we can deal with it again, don't worry about it. But because the stream ran through his land, he decided that really the logical and the most interesting thing that he could do is to create a pond. Because if he dam up a section of the creek, he'd have a pond. And of course, then he'd have plenty of water and he wouldn't have to worry because he could use the pond to take care of his crops, to take care of his family, to take care of the livestock. And so with whatever rocks that he could find and carry and drag into place and sticks, he created a dam. And lo and behold, he had a pond. Now initially that was okay, but then what transpired was all of a sudden the water that formerly ran forward started to go to other places. And the river began to move to other places and went on to other farmers' lands. And so he had no free-flowing land or free-flowing water anymore on his property. And so because the water wasn't free-flowing, what happened was algae came to the top. And weeds began to grow in the bottom of the pond. And when that happened, the fresh fish that would live in that pond began to die because there was no oxygen within it. And as the sun would beat down, the pond began to evaporate. And so out of fear, he went away to a wise man and he said, tell me what to do, as he told his whole entire story to the wise man about the drought and about the pond and about it starting to dry up. And the wise man said, get rid of both dams. And the farmer looked at him and said, both dams? Yes, get rid of both dams. And the wise man turned and walked away. Well, the farmer just was absolutely irate. What was this stupid thing that he was talking about? I need water. I need my pond. It's all I have. I have to hang on to it. I have to keep it. Wise man just walked away. And what do you mean by both dams? The wise man just walked away. And of course the farmer thought that he was stupid. And so upon returning home, he began to think about what he really had to say. He could let go of the small amount of water that was still remaining in his pond, or he could allow his farm to completely dry up. So one day he decided to face his fears, and he took the dam apart. And all of the putrid, rancid water that had been flowing on top left. And he looked at it and he said, "Oh my God, now I have nothing. I'm completely empty. I have nothing." And of course, then what began to happen was, because he had torn the dam down, the river that had been diverted to other places began to return, filling up the cracks that were left in the pond, and soon the stream was reestablished on his land. How many of us who are experiencing or have experienced lack in our life cling to what we have? Hang on to what we have, and yet it becomes rancid or putrid or awful within. You see, what the farmer did is he took his fear that there wouldn't be enough, and he created another situation that really enabled him to not have enough. But as soon as he emptied it out, as soon as he could visualize and see the flow happening within his life, within his farm, what transpired was an abundance of water once again. We're very much like that old farmer. We need to allow ourselves to be emptied out, to make way for the new, to allow newness to come within. Next, we have to come in alignment. Just imagine with me that you're stranded in this tiny little lifeboat. You're all by yourself, you've been in it several days, your water's starting to run out, food's getting low, and all of a sudden you look through your binoculars and you see off in the distance this island. And you're just ecstatic. Ooh, an island. I'll have space to walk. I can stand. And so you get the rows out and you start to, with the oars, you start to try and oar towards the island. And you get a little closer and it looks kind of, well, it's not a really great island. It's kind of barren. It's kind of ugly. Doesn't look like it would have any fresh water, but land is better than this rowboat that's knocking you all over the place. And so you work and you work and you work and you pray and you affirm that this is what you want. You want to be on an island, and you keep working at it and working at it, and the coral reef and the waves keep sending you away. Keep sending you away. And so finally you just give up and you drift some more. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you see another island. And so you start to work your way towards it, and lo and behold, when you look at it through the binoculars, what do you see? Fresh water, trees bearing lots of fruit, woods, places for you to build shelter so that you won't be there. You're no longer drifting aimlessly. You glide in with ease and grace to that second island. You feared that you would be doomed, and yet here Spirit has given you something better. What transpired within your life was an alignment with the divine. What you wanted clicked finally with the divine. And so often in life we want something, we try to create something, and then when we don't get it, we're angry, we're mad, we're upset. And yet we realize that there was something better that was waiting to be given to us. Alignment is what a sailor does. He takes the sails and the winds and the current, and he aligns them all up, and he never knows exactly what the wind's going to be. He never knows exactly what the currents are going to be, but with skill, he's able to align those up so that he can get where he wants to go by focusing on that. He focuses on what is outside of him, not what is within. And that's exactly what Jesus did when he was trying to feed the 5,000 surrounding him. He felt their hunger. He felt their suffering at that point. And that's how we stay in alignment, is by feeling the essence of what is around us and with others. Don't limit your compassion to only those people that you know. Limit or open your compassion to all people. Your personal success will be in direct proportion to the care and the compassion that you're willing to give to other people. Now, after emptying ourselves out and becoming more in alignment with the Spirit, we must give. And you say, I don't have anything to give. Yes, you do. The story of the loaves and the fishes is a story of giving. Here's a small boy. Imagine this little kid walking up to Jesus with a basket with 2 fishes and 5 loaves in it. It's all he's got. This might have been the food his family would have had for a whole entire week. It wasn't much. And yet he was willing to give it for the good, for the compassion, for the betterment of everybody. And yet he totally, in his total innocence and trust, he brought the basket forward. Now remember that Jesus, in the text that we read from Matthew, he said he raised the gift over his head. And in essence, what he was doing was giving the gift back to Source. Giving the gift back to God. Giving the gift back to God for recognition. And then each time the bread was passed in the baskets from place to place, it increased. Because you see, through giving, it increases. It's divine circulation, and it's happening. The bread and the fish kept expanding and expanding. And the act of giving undid the congestion that was there. It stimulated the flow and the growth. As we give, we must focus on the feeling behind the gift. And it's the intent behind our gift, just like our tithes and offering, is the real power. Remember, like attracts like. Feelings of satisfaction and joy will continue to multiply in our life as we give. Whenever it's possible, give anonymously. Some of you know that I'm preparing to do the AIDS ride in June from San Francisco to LA, and people go online and they click on and they make a donation, and it shows their name and their amount. And I probably have about a half a dozen people there that say anonymous. And of course I'm going, but I can't give them a thank you note. And yet there is such power because they have set their egos aside to give the gift. True generosity seeks no return and no acknowledgement. And when we give anonymously, we are setting ourselves aside and setting ourselves out of the picture. And then again, don't limit your gifts to just money. Listening, helping a child, cooperating with someone, those are all gifts that we give. Besides being willing to give, we must also be willing to receive. One of my favorite stories out of the Old Testament is in 2 Kings, where a widowed woman comes to Elijah. And she explains to him that her family had borrowed a great deal of money and now her husband was dead. And the lender was threatening to take the 2 sons that she had and sell them into slavery to pay for the money that the family had borrowed. And of course the widow realized that if the sons were taken away from her, all ability for her to have money to support her would be gone. They would lose everything. So when she spoke with Elijah, she said, what can I do? Please help me. And Elijah looked at her and he said, do you have anything of value whatsoever? And she said, well, all I have is a jar of oil. Now, a jar of oil in those days was a pretty hot commodity. That would be like electricity for us today. That's how they lit their homes, was through oil. And so Elijah looks at her and he said, go and collect all the empty jars you can find from all of your neighbors in your village. Collect as many as you can. Go into your home, close the door, and fill the jars with the oil. She kind of thought he was a little bit crazy. She just had a little itty-bitty jar of oil. How was this little itty-bitty jar of oil going to fill up so many jars? But she was trusting. She was desperate. She didn't want to lose her sons. She didn't want to lose her future. And so they went home, they collected as many jars as they did, they closed the door, and she began to fill the first empty jar. And as soon as it was full, the next jar appeared. She told her other son, go get another jar. Go get another jar. Go get another jar. And she filled all of the jars that they had collected, and the oil stopped flowing when there were no more jars to fill. And she was able to sell all of those jars back to her neighbor filled with oil, paying off the dent and making enough for her to live on, her and her sons to live on in the future. Remember, our supply is infinite. We're only limited by our own ability to receive. Once we accept abundance into our life, we must be willing to allow it to permeate our lives with joy and complete, entire satisfaction. In other words, we have to be willing to allow God to fill us up, to fill up that emptiness. So as you begin to attract what you want in your life, remember to receive and let the energy of that joy, of that love, of that fun that is being created to fill your life up. Be wide open in a new consciousness and believe that anything and everything is possible. Avoid limiting and fearful thinking. And remember that what you put out is what comes back. Develop a sense of worthiness within yourself, because when you stay centered in compassion and are giving generously to those around you, you are worthy. Finally, we have to look at one of my favorites to be able to experience this abundance, and that's gratitude. Now, in the scriptures that we read this morning, it states that Jesus blessed the food. And the Greek word for bless, I'll pronounce it as best as I can, evlogius. And a modern derivation of that word is eulogy. Now, usually we think of eulogy as what? A presentation that's given at a funeral. However, when you look at the interpretation of it from the original Greek, it means to praise, to bless, to speak well of, and to give thanks. So the essence of the blessing that Jesus gave was that the supply that was there before them was perfect. It was divinely right. He didn't question the amount of 5 loaves and 2 fishes for 5,000 people. He was grateful for what was there. And the more grateful we are, the greater the gifts are. Here's a little exercise I'd like you to do. Think of someone that you gave a gift to that completely and totally appreciated that gift. They were ecstatic about that. They expressed gratitude to you. They were excited to use it. You got to see them use the gift. And every time you saw them using it, you could see the joy that they experienced in it. Have you got that person in mind? Do you remember what the gift was? Okay, now I'd like you to think of somebody else. Think of somebody that you gave another gift to. Oh yeah, thanks. No gratitude was expressed. You never saw it when you went into their home. You never saw them use it. In fact, one day you drove by and you saw it sitting in the Goodwill box. Got that person in mind? Which one do you think you'll give gifts to again? That's what divine intelligence is. When we're willing to receive and we receive joyfully, and we express that deep and great gratitude for what we have been given, it just keeps coming. When we go to that place of negativity, however, and are unappreciative of what we have been, or we're complacent about the gift, there will be no more. So how can we multiply the fishes and the loaves in our life? How can you do it within yours? Name a few for me. How can you multiply the fishes in the lives? You can multiply them by blessing. Blessing anything and everything that comes to you. The lights in your house, the food that you eat, the friends that you have, the company that comes to you, that fine glass of wine last night. Ah, yes. We express blessings and gratitude for all that we have given. And then more importantly, we never speak ill of others. We never let negativity cross our lips. Remember when you were a kid and you watched the Ed Sullivan Show, or you went to the circus, and there was this long board that they'd come and they had these poles on it, and they'd put a plate at the top of it, and they'd come over here and they'd start to twirl this one, and the plate would start to go around real fast, and then he'd move on to the next one, and he'd do the same thing with that. He'd get all these plates going all across, and then he'd have to jump back over here and get this next plate going back again. And before you knew it, he had like 7 or 8 of those plates going in front of you before any of them dropped on the floor. Well, that's what this is all like. He had all of those moving in unison with each other. And when we go to that place of receiving, of emptying ourselves out, of being willing to receive, of giving gifts back, of staying in that place of gratitude, that's alignment within our life. It's making all the plates work in unison. You have to get all of those conditions lined up. And once you do, it's not magic, it's not a miracle, it's an ordinary. And you can do it in your life. This is the truth in my life, and this is the truth in yours, and so it is. Well, the ushers, please come forward.